Absolutely. Well, welcome everybody. We're glad that you joined us. Where the hope of tonight is to give you a sense of like what sets apart middle school from elementary years, from the K to 5 years, as well as understanding what sets our middle school apart from a traditional model. We spent last year, well, really the summer before, honestly, I and Chris, we engaged with Chris as our middle school design lead. Chris began a school in San Francisco called Millennium School, and really reimagined middle school. And he'll talk a little bit more about why that was important. Chris is a newly published author of Finding the Magic in Middle School, which is over by my bed, but highly recommend that you check into his book as your child approaches middle school. But Chris and I collaborated. I am not by nature, by training, a middle school trained person. And Chris has been my guru and my mentor this whole time to think about what do middle school kids need? And it's very different. I've learned so much. And so we have reimagined not only the middle school, what the needs are of the kids based on the neurological science, but also the schedule, the cadence, all of it, the curriculum. We've reimagined everything. Last year was our first year, and now we're into the second term of our second year with this new model. And so it's really important for you guys to understand where your kids are headed next after, if they're in the blue room, their life will change next year. And so I would love for you to understand where they're headed. So a little about Chris himself. So Chris is the dad of 3, self-proclaimed lifelong nerd. He'll talk a little bit probably about kind of how unhappy he was during his middle school years. I share a kind of miserable experience in my middle school years as I think a lot of us might. So after business school, decided that wasn't for him, and so he went into becoming a science teacher, and then started a nonprofit that was dedicated to middle school. So truly, Chris, you are invested deeply in this 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old zone. And as I mentioned before, I founded and was head of school for a lab school in San Francisco called Millennium, which actually Cynthia and I just visited last June as part of our project-based learning and innovative schools cooperative work last summer. So Chris, I turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Kim, and greetings, everyone. First, I apologize if I sound underwater. I have 3 kids between preschool and 4th grade, and they've been more or less continuously sick with a variety of things for about 5 weeks. So we're all just jumping from one cold to the next and just started a new one. But welcome, everyone. I, as Kim said, love getting to talk about middle school. I think it's one of the most misunderstood and underappreciated of ages, maybe the most. I'll put that out there. And so, as Kim said, I've been very lucky to get to spend a lot of time now, 20 years, working with middle schoolers in all kinds of roles, from writing curriculum to being a teacher to founding a school to being a head of school, now to consulting with other schools and writing this book about middle school. So I'm still learning a ton, and I have some stories to share from the adventures so far. So I'll jump in, and our hope today is to first give you kind of a beginning framework of the neuroscience of what's going on in middle schoolers' brains. What are they most driven to do? And then from there, how that leads us to certain design decisions about what kind of middle school we want to create. And throughout this, please jump in at any point with questions. It's definitely not my style to just talk at people. So I'd love to know if you're agreeing, disagreeing, have questions, anything's confusing, please just unmute and jump in or pop it in the chat, and we'll make it conversational that way. So the whole kind of essence of this, the beginning point, is middle school is its own developmental phase. And part of why I think it's been so troubled, and why people think of it as sometimes the worst years of our lives, is that it often gets lumped in with younger kids or older kids. And you see that in the way, there's no standard for what middle school is in terms of years across the country. Sometimes it's 5, 6, 7, 6 through 8, 7 through 9. Sometimes it's part of elementary, sometimes it's on its own. There's a lot of confusion about what middle school is. So our starting point for all this is research, really understanding neurologically and psychologically what is going on in the minds, bodies, hearts of middle schoolers. And the idea is the more deeply we understand them developmentally, the more we design to tap into those developmental motivations rather than ending up battling them, which is often where things go off the rails in middle school. So can go on to the next slide. And the idea with all this, I think, goes without saying, this is part of the reason you're probably at Hudson Lab School, is it's time to think differently about school in general, but particularly middle school. And I won't terrify you too much with the statistics overall, but we know that middle school, as it normally is a time when the majority of kids lose interest in school. Mental health problems go through the roof, engagement with school goes through the floor. So it's time for it to be reinvented. And I think we have some good research as a basis for that. Okay, so here we go. We'll talk a little bit about the middle school brain, 4 ways that affects how we choose to teach and work with middle schoolers, some details in practice, what that looks like, and then profile of a graduate, who we are hoping to develop over these 3 years we get to be with them. And I'll start here with a metaphor that I find helpful for thinking about adolescence. So, and maybe just to back up for a second, I think one of the challenges, and I'm going to push us a little bit just in these, half hour, 45 minutes that we have, is it's hard for us, I think, as adults to remember what it's really like to be an adolescent, as they are changing so remarkably fast, and we're not. We may feel like we're still changing, hopefully we are, but the speed is totally different. And so part of the work, I think, whether as parents or educators of middle schoolers, is to try to kind of bring our own middle school self back out of hiding. I believe that, they're still in there. We've kind of added layers on top of them as we get older, but to try to remember, what is it like to be waking up and feeling like your body is different, like your emotions are more intense. And there's research showing that middle school to early high school is the most volatile time emotionally of our whole lives. Getting smarter also, being able to see through things, to see through people and realize what their other motivations might be that they're not saying. The world is changing really quickly for a middle schooler. So the metaphor I like for this is whitewater rafting, because there's something about whitewater rafting, if you've ever had the chance to do it, that is both really exciting and really scary. And the two kind of go back and forth without a lot of warning. It can feel like you're on an amazing adventure, and then it can, a boulder is coming up and you don't know if you're about to get thrown out of the boat, and it's all of a sudden terrifying. So offering that as a metaphor for us to have some empathy for what it's like to be an adolescent and to be changing as rapidly as they are. And then second, to remind us that it's a social adventure. So middle school is all about figuring out who you are in a social world that you can now see because your brain has made this leap to understand the social dynamics around you. So in this raft are other middle schoolers. Everyone is trying to figure out at the same time, what's okay? What are our relationships? Is this supposed to be fun? They're trying to figure out, moment by moment, how to do this. So I'll offer this metaphor, and we'll kind of keep coming back to it as we talk about some of the brain science. So can go on to the next one. Thank you, Kate. So there are, I think, 3 driving questions that you could summarize a lot of different neuroscience and developmental science with these questions. And the first of these is, who am I? That for middle schoolers, right around age 11 on average, depends when puberty starts, their ability to pick up the social world gets dramatically better. There's research around their ability to read faces, for example, takes a leap. The bigness of their reactions to others' emotions is also increasing. So they're picking up the emotional currents around them. They're feeling strong emotions in themselves in reaction. They're able to pick up groupings better. They see who's included and who's excluded. And fundamentally, they realize that people are always judging them. And the effect of that is that this question, who am I, is a lot more intense than it is for younger kids. In elementary, you can be kind of a little goofier and effortlessly yourself. And, you show up and talk about your passion for snails, and you're not really worried about what people think about that for most kids. Middle schoolers are going to become worried about that. And they're going to wonder, is it okay to be me? Should I copy someone else who seems like they're cool and confident? And so we think of this as a fork in the road between becoming a false self or creating a false self, where you've copied someone else who has some power or status, or discovering your authentic self, which is an ongoing process, everyday experiments to figure out, who am I? Might I be the kid who loves theater? Maybe swimming is my thing. Maybe Dungeons and Dragons is my thing. Whatever it might be. Middle school is a series of experiments to answer this question, who am I? And so all of our classes, we want to design to tap into this question, to help them reflect on their identity and who they're becoming as part of their class. Go on to the next one. So this is, of course, fundamental to everything I've been saying. Middle school is the most socially motivated time in our lives, period. It's the time when we can pick up what's happening socially very accurately, similar to what an adult can, but without the experience to know what to do with that information. So very good skills of perception, not so good skills yet of interpretation. And what that means is it's a roller coaster socially for a lot of kids, that they're not sure if someone, gives them a weird look today. Is that person just feeling grouchy, or is their social life over because something terrible has happened? So quickly they can go to catastrophic thoughts about what is going wrong when things are going wrong. But the flip side of that is also they enjoy their friendships more than they did in elementary school, most likely. They're deeper friendships, their groups can become incredibly close. So really, middle school is this prime developmental window to learn how to be around other people. Collaboration, leadership, solving problems interpersonally. This is really probably the best time in life to learn those skills, because again, your brain has just developed the ability to see the social world so much more accurately. Now you can do something with that information. So for us, that means classes have to be social. If you're trying to teach middle schoolers in traditional lecture style, where they're sitting in rows of desks and supposed to be silent, just listening to you, you are going directly upstream, fighting all of the natural currents of middle school. So instead, we teach in projects, and projects are done in teams. It's not easy. They have to get through all kinds of dilemmas of how to work together, but it taps into their motivation and gives them a set of skills that will be so valuable for their adult life. So that's number 2. And then number 3 is, what will I contribute? The drive here is that middle schoolers want their work to feel relevant. Probably the fastest way to piss off a middle schooler is to baby them when they don't want to be babied, to treat them like a little kid and not show that you see that they can make meaningful contributions. That usually does not go over well. So middle schoolers, for most of our history as a species, were people who had to start producing value and, in a sense, become, step into adulthood pretty clearly, contribute economically, take care of people or animals. In our world, we have the ability to keep them in education for much longer, which is great. But if they don't feel like they're contributing value, it's hard for them to feel like valuable people. So the research here talks about how we internalize a sense of value when we see it in someone else's eyes. And the twist with this is that someone else needs to be someone who seems objective, like part of the real world. They know that we, parents and teachers, are on their team. So our praise does matter, but it doesn't matter as much as the praise of someone, out there in the real world who's really working on something that interests them. So as this applies to our classes, it's really important that their final work after a project is seen by real life experts. So if they're studying, doing a biology project, We'll be alongside them, but a biologist should be there in the audience, hearing their work and giving them feedback. And when they, as a 12 or 13-year-old, hear that a professional, say in this case, thought that they did original and interesting work, that really matters to them. That builds their esteem, their sense that they can actually do something meaningful. And it leads them to be more engaged. They take themselves more seriously and they take their work more seriously. So that's the third one, is to help them feel like they are contributing in a real world way. Okay, so if those are the three kind of stages, you could think of them like three currents that are kind of pushing that river, that whitewater river down. The other kind of model to think about from the research is that there are three stages that middle schoolers go through developmentally. These are, everyone moves at their own pace. Girls tend to move a year or two ahead of boys at this age, just based on timing of puberty. So it's hard to predict when someone will go through this stage, but the sequence is pretty consistent across middle schoolers. And we use this as a way to understand what a student needs in a given moment. So the first stage for most middle schoolers is the stage of seeking belonging above anything else. And to empathize with this, imagine if, say, you had started a new job in a new city, and you're basically starting fresh, in your life and career. Probably in the very first weeks, or months of that job, you would be checking to see, am I welcome here? Was this the right move to show up here? And that is what middle schoolers are feeling. They're just showing up in this social world that now they can perceive that we've already been living in for a while. They're just showing up in middle school with different rules, different ways of learning. So the foundation for that is a sense of belonging, sense that they're welcomed here, they're accepted, they're not going to be made fun of or kicked out. That's what gives them the psychological safety to apply themselves, to take a risk, to put real effort into something, to do something that's original and not just, copying what they've seen as a model. So first stage is belonging. Now that first stage has a kind of a dark side that leads to the second stage. Middle schoolers have a real risk of conformity because they want to belong so badly. They're often pretty much willing to almost erase their sense of self and become identical to someone else. The classic best friends forever is something that younger kids say too, but in middle school, sometimes that has real intensity. Or a small group that really tries to, match all of their tastes, all of the things that they like, the language they use, what's cool and not cool. So some of that is normal because they're trying to complete that need for belonging. But at some point, the conformity starts to get to be too much. Some middle schoolers will start to find it grating or annoying or like it's holding them back. We might, as educators, if we see them really stuck in conformity for a long time, might start to challenge it. And what we're trying to do is to bring them to this next stage that we call achievement. So in the achievement stage, middle schoolers are understanding that we all play games all the time. Some of those are games for, how do you win on the sports field? How do you do something that this teacher will be really impressed by? How do you master writing a scientific research paper? That there are games and rules that they can learn and master. So the opportunity of this stage is that they get to be good at playing those games. They know how to figure out the rules. They know that they have the ability to practice and get better at them. And ultimately, they know that they can earn respect through their work, respect from other people. So this is a stage where they want to win. They want to show that they've got skill in whatever domain, academic, social, otherwise. And so that's the second. There's one last stage that we think is possible for middle schoolers. So the authenticity stage is where you are bringing together the skills to belong, to find or repair friendships, the skills to get stuff done and achieve. But you're starting to kind of say to yourself, like, what game do I want to play? This is the stage where, in more traditional middle schools with letter grades, a lot of kids will say, like, what is the point of a grade anyways? Like, what's the point of this class? Why are we learning this? Those are really fair questions. And that's a signal that they're working on the stage of authenticity. And to me, this is kind of like, the holy grail of middle school, that when they're starting to work on this stage, it means that they're becoming comfortable enough to be themselves in this social world that they can see. They get that it's intense, they get that people are judging them, and they're confident enough and skilled enough that they can be themselves. And being yourself is not just like a romantic ideal, but when you are following things that you genuinely care about, you have higher resilience, you have much higher motivation, you're much more likely to build a uniquely high level of skill in that area. So it's a practical, it's a very practically useful thing to know what you're authentically passionate about and be able to pursue that. So I'm going to pause for a second before we go into how we teach, because I've just said so many words. I want to just see how that's landing with people, and what questions, thoughts, or confusions might be coming up. Totally
Questions,
flooded
anyone?
everyone.
I just really appreciated all of that. I never really had an understanding of the developmental stages of middle school, so that was it's great to hear, and it's comforting to hear.
Yeah,
Thank you.
I have learned so much, you guys, learning like as we've kind of grown up with the grades and have 8th grade this year. It is, and you'll start to feel it this spring if you have a 5th grader. That's when you'll start to feel kind of that belonging stage starting. So it's very distinct. And now that you've heard what Chris is saying, you will know what you're looking at when the time comes.
Yeah, I often wonder, it's like, when you have a really young child, like a toddler, I found like those developmental guides are so helpful. Otherwise, it would be really confusing, like what on earth is going on with them. And a lot of my interest and passion around this is to try to create something equivalent for middle school, as they're actually, those years, early childhood and early adolescence, are the 2 peak times of brain growth in our entire lifespan. So things are moving really fast, and they're probably the hardest years to parent as well because of that. So, there's all kinds of good developmental stuff for the toddler, early childhood years. And what I'm trying to share, super fast version, is an equivalent way to understand the early adolescent years. Any other questions before we jump back in? Okay, so if we had more time, there are kind of suggestions and guidance for each of those stages and how to support them. And it's in the book, and also maybe we can do a future conversation about that. But at least that's kind of the quick outline. And now I want to make this a little less theoretical and more practical, of how have we set up our whole learning program at the middle school so that we can use these ideas to make really engaging classes. So here we go. So the first key choice, and really almost everything is built around this at the middle school, is that project-based learning, when done well, works really well for this age. Middle schoolers, as I said before, do not want to be lectured at. They don't want to just fill in worksheets. That's going to feel like it's not relevant, real world, not worthy of their attention. They want to take on challenges that they see adults actually struggling with. So if someone out there in the world doesn't think it's important, why should they? They want things that are interdisciplinary, because again, it's more real that way. We're taking on real problems and questions. And when they get to present to experts, their motivation is much higher than if they know they're just sharing this with parents and teachers. So those are some of the fundamentals for how we do projects, and I'll say more as we go deeper. We call the projects quests, and that's just to kind of tap into the spirit of adventure that, traditional middle school, I think to many kids, and for me, this was certainly true, just felt like a machine where you're just kind of being processed by this very large machine, doing your thing, 45 minutes of this, onto the next worksheet. That there are many reasons why that doesn't work well, but one of the most direct ones is that most of us don't remember much from middle school when we have that kind of school experience. We don't remember much academically. It's because it's not, the neuroscience research shows that if there isn't emotional content woven together with academic content, and if it's not used in relationships, then our brains think that it's not that important, and it does not get prioritized to be remembered. It goes into short-term memory, not long-term. So that's one of many reasons why that traditional model doesn't really work well. Instead, the spirit of quests is about creating adventures that feel worth remembering. So, for example, instead of just motoring along with, English class every day for the whole year, science every day for the whole year, we do 6-week bursts of learning in the middle school. And this is based on the research that learning needs to follow an emotional arc. Over 6 weeks, there's enough time to feel like you can really invest yourself in a project, can learn a lot about it. You can produce a product that you're proud of. You can work intensively because it's just for 6 weeks. And then you can take a pause, do an intersession. We'll say more about that, or maybe there's a school vacation between terms, and you come back refreshed and ready for something new and different. So that's one way that we try to tap into that spirit of adventure. We also really design quests, as I mentioned, around something that has real world salience. So some examples you're seeing here are a quest where we looked at untold stories, whose stories tend to get told in media and in stories, kids' stories, and what groups of people have traditionally been marginalized and their stories are not part of that dominant narrative. And could we find those stories and lift them up? So we actually, in a quest last year, had every student write their own children's book based on a story that they felt had been marginalized. And here are some of them, and they were really incredible. So that you can imagine, like if you were in, English class every day for 45 minutes versus you wrote your own children's book, based on a story that you chose for a cause that you feel is important. I think it's not a stretch to imagine they're going to remember this much more. It might even shape their sense of who they are, much more than a traditional middle school experience. So then just a quick note on math. This is kind of the one area where we teach in 2 different ways. And this is because we've learned, and from the experience of other schools doing this as well, that if math is only taught through projects, it's difficult to build a strong enough foundation because there's more of a natural sequence of skills in math. So we teach it in projects and as a distinct class. And that kind of gives us the peace of mind that there won't be big holes in students' math knowledge, but also lets us do it in a project-based way so that they realize that math is something that's quite real world, that has real relevance. Last point I'll make here is that we really don't want to teach math in a formulaic way. It's not just about memorizing. If you see this format of problem, then I remember the formula, even though I don't know why, and I just do that in an automatic way. We're trying to teach math in a way that shows that most problems have multiple solutions, and we can each take different solution paths. We can debate the pros and cons of different solutions. We think this is a much deeper way to understand math, and also reduces the risk that some students will come to the decision that, oh, I'm just not a math person, or I hate math, which is unfortunately a common thing that happens in a lot of middle schools. So it's a little bit about how we're doing differently. Yes.
Yeah, I'll just add that philosophy that you just described is K-8. It really does apply to every grade level, in that we're not aiming for formulas and memorization, that they have to fundamentally have a math sense and be able to perform with mental math. So that's across the board.
Your kids are so lucky that they get this at HLS. It is not normal. I mean that in the best sense. So yeah, it's really awesome that that's consistent. So then I would put alongside project-based learning as the other real pillar of a great middle school experience is social emotional learning. So for all the reasons I've shared already, middle school is a time of high emotional volatility, much stronger and more complex emotions, and much better social sensing, really high motivation to figure out the social world. So you can either see that as a problem. It's like, how do I get them to, stop talking to each other and just listen? Or you can see it as one of the best opportunities in life to learn one of the most important skill sets in life, which is how to manage your inner world and how to relate to people. And luckily, there's pretty good research on this now, as you're probably all aware, if you're at HLS, that social emotional learning is a bigger driver of lifelong success than pure IQ. And that's whether you measure it in terms of happiness or even career success. It shows up on test scores. It shows up in mental health, quality of relationships, even many, many years after students have completed their whole education. So we know SEL matters hugely. And middle school is, again, perhaps the best window of opportunity to teach social intelligence in particular, because they have just activated their social brains. So for all those reasons, we think advisory is one of the most important parts of middle school. I would say it's really the heart of a great middle school. And we've created our small advisories, small groups of students that are matched with one or sometimes two advisors for multiple years. So it really becomes a very safe space. They have space to talk about whatever is on their minds, whether it's, I'm stressed about this project finishing up, or, my friend's not talking to me anymore. What do I do to fix that? What did I do wrong? Managing emotions, or my sibling is driving me crazy. Whatever it is fair game. If it's about, their social life and their emotional life. And we have a lot of tools to offer them, from regulating emotions to resolving conflicts. So that's really, I think, how you teach social and emotional intelligence in a way that feels relevant. It's not about lecturing them on social and emotional intelligence. It's about responding when they have a need for one of those tools. Then they're really interested. They're really open to hearing it.
Can you talk a little bit more about the advisory component, or what that looks like, or who's on point to provide this advice to our kids?
Yes. Yeah, actually, maybe Kim, do you want to share some about the middle school faculty in that regard? And then I can give some of the curriculum background.
Absolutely. So we have, of the three, we kind of started the year with the whole group together. It's only 14 of them. We quickly recognized too many social dialogues were happening. And so now we divide into, Ashley takes the 6th graders, Ellie takes the 7th graders, and Kenan takes the 8th graders. And you could immediately see, you guys, their shoulders go down, and they're like, we want to talk about 6th grade stuff. And like, it was like really beautiful to see. And they definitely need that every morning. So we start that way every morning. Chris has written a curriculum called Diving Boards that we were all trained on last summer. And that is the kind of the diving board for our SEL curriculum. So it's a lot of intriguing questions. For example, where we will open up a dialogue on, it could be a lot of things. Chris can give us some examples, but building friendships, repairing friendships. It ranges from anything from like mental health questions in terms of like how you're feeling, to like consent, and to navigating the social world. And so each morning there's a check-in, and then they're connected to their advisor. So they have that person to go to, and they have those kind of really small group conversations around what's going on in their life. And they know that that's a safe space. We do a lot of work around creating that safe space, that they enter in a certain way. It's a very mindful space. We do a lot of work around helping them broach subjects that might be sticky. Like how might they introduce something that's on their mind without, in a way that the whole group will find constructive and that they can talk about it. It's been really powerful. I'll say that it's been exactly what they need. Like, they just have a lot internally happening, and they need a place to bring it, lay it out, examine it together, and then be able to understand and process what's happening for them. For the sixth graders, it is totally about fitting in. Like that's all that's on their mind. You know, the eighth grade is more like, how do I get into high school? Like, this is a whole new, transition. And the seventh grade somewhere in between. Like they're a very funny group of kids. And developmentally, it's been very eye-opening for me in terms of what they need. And if we didn't have that advisory, I think it would be a different ballgame. And I tell a story, I have a teacher friend of mine who's retired, who used to tell me she had her kids check it at the door. They had to check everything at the door because it was time for math or time for social studies. And I just didn't understand that. And that it's not possible for middle schoolers. They walk in with a lot and they need a place to bring it before they can clear their minds and focus on the academics. So Chris, you can speak a little bit more about the diving boards perhaps, or even we have a everyday check-in in the morning first thing, and then we have a Wednesday kind of deep dive on a topic.
Yeah, no, you said it really well. I think the foundation is the skills to facilitate, to be a facilitator rather than an instructor. So that's what we've worked on training the middle school faculty around, and they're really good with this. I'm not here to lecture at you about how to be or how to manage your emotions, but I'm here to create a space that is safe and is clearly safe to you, where you feel comfortable saying, that sticky subject on your mind if you want, or responding authentically to someone else who shared a difficulty, or just also, it's not always about difficulties, celebrating each other, just going through the ups and downs of adolescence together. And once you have that safe space, then you can kind of mix in these prompts, which is what that curriculum is of, today, let's talk about, how do we actually make friendships? Is that just something that happens by accident, or is it skill? And what happens when they break? How do you repair them? And, always sourcing the wisdom and experience from students first, and then responding with some tools and some ways to, to fix things when they need to be fixed in that case. So it's a really sweet part of middle school, I think. And I really wish I had something like that in middle school. I did not ever have a space like that. I think, unfortunately, probably most people still do not have that kind of space.
I would say also, and that's another nice space to process current events. When they hear things in the news and things are going on in the world and they need to orient themselves, advisory is another nice structure for that, where they can just bring up questions and process together. I will stop to have Chris just mention Argonaut for a moment, because I think you have a really lovely after school program that is worth mentioning, which is that similar, right? It's an advisory structure, but after school online.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. So when I was running Millennium School out here in San Francisco, it was really clear to us that advisory was the heart of the school and often what generated the most connection for students. So when I left that role of being head of school, I created an online version of advisory that students all over the world have signed up for. And it's just, you can go to the website to see more, and some of the curriculum that also use at HLS is up on there. But the idea is that I think every person deserves a safe space where they can process and make meaning out of life, period. And then the people who might deserve it most of all, I think, would be adolescents, because they're just kind of tumbling into this crazy adult world that we're all semi-used to. And they've got a lot of work to do to make sense of it and themselves. So yeah, I could get on the soapbox here for a while, but I think advisory is really, really important for this age.
Kim, I'm just trying to understand advisory a little bit more, just because our school is so small and everyone wears so many different hats. So is the understanding that the teacher's also the advisor, or is there a plan for differentiation between the two, so that teachers can, quote, teach? Of course, they still have to advise, but, and that there's someone that the students can go to that might be invested in a different way to work with them more on the social emotional piece of it.
Such a good question. We really want to develop, and I think they already have it in teachers, the ability to be great advisors, partly because We don't want students to feel like there are some adults that I can go to with that and others not. But also we know that when teachers become great advisors, that kind of leaks in a good way into their academic teaching. When they have those skills to be kind of less traditionally didactic and more able to create deep discussions, that works awfully well, for a lot of academic experiences as well. So I know there are some cases where, a counselor or even a psychologist, really someone with that more specialized skill is needed. So teachers can't cover every possible scenario, but I think they can cover more than some people might think with the right training. And then, that 5% of cases that need specialized support, then we have people we can go to for that. Yeah. Other questions or thoughts at this moment?
I have one more question. I'm not sure if you're maybe going to cover it in your presentation. If you are, then I apologize for jumping the gun. But is there any thoughts or discussion with regards to X-missions and what it looks like in 8th grade and what the plans are the readiness for high school, as well as the X-missions process, not only readiness as far as student readiness, which is important, but also the X-missions process in general, because at least right now, Hudson Lab doesn't have a high school. And how does that look? Where that whole process.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Chris can probably speak to more generalities, but Chris has been my guiding mentor in all of this. So, I've spent some time, we have 4 8th graders this year. So I've spent a little time with their parents, understanding where everybody's applying and what their needs are. We originally had a test prep class set up, but I'm finding that most schools are not requiring tests right now. So we've kind of backpedaled a little from spending much time on that. So a couple of the kids who are going to need test prep have done that outside of school because it wasn't a pressing need this year. And that's a result of COVID, I think. So I'm building relationships. I recently met with the head of Masters. I'm meeting with the head of Harvey School soon. So I'm building inroads with schools where are good, probably natural fits for our kids to be playing out in these early years until we get our high school squared away. As my 3rd grade son will tell you, it better be in place by the time he gets up there. So we're
Joe's already said this better be happening by now, but I figured I'd ask the question in general because as far as it's concerned in this household, she's not going anywhere until college.
Right? LS2. But on the other hand, we're being prepared for both. So, so kind of an awareness around what kids are facing. Most of the kids do have essay questions coming in from different various applications, and Ashley is supporting that work. So she's, she can't do it for them, but she's definitely giving them a feedback loop. So the questions come in, she's looking over essays with them. And I'm, of course, all of myself and all the teachers are writing recommendations for kids. Those 4 8th graders have all applied a variety of places. So we're writing recommendations for them at this time. So that's kind of where things stand now. We do have hopes that there's a high school or a high school track for, our kids. I'm also actively trying to find schools that seem like a good fit for our graduates. That's work that's ongoing. But we're pretty on top of it. Chris, what would you add to that? What else do you think did I leave anything out?
Not for HLS. I would just maybe give context from the story at Millennium School because it's such a similar school, and it's been around for a little bit longer. So we've seen kids go through high school, and we were really worried for that first class, like what are high schools going to make of this? We're not normal. We think we're not normal in a really good way, but how are they going to interpret that? Transcripts, they're not going to see traditional GPA. What will they make of that? And we did what Kim is doing, which is first, it's relationships. People start to trust you. We go to them, we invite them to tour the school. They're going to be super impressed by what they see. This is so much more engaging and close and exciting than most middle schools. And what we found now, having 4 classes so far go through Millennium and into high school, is that they've had extremely good results getting into high schools. I think they really stand out based on the type of transcripts and the story that goes with it that they give. So instead of, a really boring typical, GPA transcripts, their transcript has a list of all the projects they've done in middle school, which are amazing projects that look like college classes, a highlight with the one that meant the most to them. And then an advisor highlight where they talk about the personal qualities that they see in this student. And then some numerical information about how they've done in different academic subjects. So I think they'll be well positioned to really stand out from the crowd when they apply for high school.
Can
So we're
you
preparing-
talk a little bit?
Sorry.
Sorry,
Sorry.
can you talk a little bit about that transition from being in a PBL-based learning environment and then moving into high school? Because from a standpoint of learning style, but also socially, can you share some, I don't know, case studies or what you've heard?
Yeah.
From they had to navigate that space, because that transition between middle school and high school is a doozy.
It's a
So-
doozy. That's the perfect word for it. Yeah. A lot of stories on that. That's one of the themes, is that, at Millennium School, we weren't sure, are all the kids going to try to go to the most PBL-ish high schools, or what will happen if they don't go to those? And what we found now over several years is that they go to a really wide range, and we think of that as a good thing. So there are some kids who come out of this, small, intimate PBL school and say, like, I want a school. Literally, a kid told me this, like, I want a school with marching bands. There has to be a marching band at the school. It's like, okay, there's some Catholic high schools in town that are fantastic marching bands. So they go all over, including the very progressive schools to public schools to, more traditional. And what we found is that if they have these middle school years to figure out who they are and keep fueling that sense of themselves, and they're making an informed choice about high school, then that sense of self is much more intact than if you're exiting middle school having copied someone else, not really caring about academics, and now getting thrown into high school and getting spun around all over again. So I've talked to students who've gone to those traditional schools, and they've said, yeah, I don't think my teachers don't know me that well. And, I get that it's a game for grades, but like, I wanted a big school, or, they're reflecting on it and why they made that choice, and hopefully adding that to their story, rather than just kind of bouncing confusedly from place to place. So, and then I'll also say, like, that first semester is often a crazy time in high school if you've gone to a more traditional high school. And so we prepare kids for that and say, if you're going from project-based learning into traditional lecture style classes, like it's going to take some getting used to. But if they chose that, they're prepared for it, they have a stronger sense of who they are and what they love to do. First of all, they're probably going to come across as a way more exciting student to teach. So there's a better chance for relationship with teachers. But they will figure out the game. They're more than capable of figuring out, different school cultures. So, I know those are kind of generalities, but that's some of what I've seen.
I just had a thought and a question. I mean, theoretically, it's so well positioning a child to move into the next phase. And practically thinking about the content and the courses that children are expected to engage in high school, how are you seeing some of your graduates with things like foreign language and science, like earth science and biology that sometimes happen in middle school? How are they able to engage in those traditional subjects once they get to high school?
Yeah. There was an interesting study that came out several years ago that was looking at the pacing of how quickly classes moved through topics in a traditional middle school compared to homeschoolers. And the study found that homeschoolers moved approximately 3 times as fast through the content. And the theory behind this is still a theory, is that without having to worry about major amounts of classroom discipline problems, without having to spend huge amounts of time on standardized test prep, which tends to not be remembered, not building long-term retention, you just move much faster. And the actual core middle school curriculum is not so big that you have to spend 3 years working on it every day. So all that is to say that, our whole, when we were designing the curriculum, we we go extensively through the Common Core as well as other sources. And we're making sure that they're covering the essential skills and the core knowledge from those. But we're not doing it in that machine-like way of saying, unit 12 today, memorize these battles. We're trying to get toward how you analyze, how you understand that, how you make meaning of it personally. And I think that will directly translate into high school. There may be some, in any high school, kids are going to come in with slight gaps based on the school they came from and, the teacher that year and what they focused on. But I don't think they will be behind in any way. I think they'll be ahead in terms of their motivation and ability to make sense of these things.
I am just going to tag onto that. Like each time when we stop to plan a quest or a project across the board, any grade level, we first start with looking at the core standards, and the science and social studies especially are mostly baked into our projects. So we then look and think, what do we need to touch on this year? What do we need to make sure that they're engaging with this year? And that's then baked into the project from the beginning. So it doesn't mean that they go to social studies for 42 minutes or science for 42 minutes, but it is completely within context of what it is that they're learning, which I find then creates a deeper attachment to the concepts themselves. Your point about foreign language is fair. We as a school made a decision that, and I have a bilingual kid myself, and the only reason he's bilingual is because he's been immersed in it for his whole life. We have not, as a young school, been able to go to an immersive model yet, even though I really do personally desire that. But an after school class is fine, but I don't pretend that that's going to make them a fluent Spanish speaker or Chinese speaker or whatnot. So that's just the nature of us being really new and really small. So I do think that the language piece is something that we're not there yet on, but I feel pretty confident about the humanities and the social and the sciences, that it may not look your typical lecture style. Here's fill in the workbook, take a test, but they'll get that through the quest. And we're being very thoughtful. For example, this 8th grade class coming up, we're looking back now at 5th, 6th, 7th grade and figuring out, we're making sure, like, what did they have enough chemistry? Did they have enough, biology? What do we need to make sure these next couple quests have in them so that they can make sure that we've touched on, we use the NGSS, the standards through NGSS, which will make sure that they have exposure to everything that they need to in the middle school years there. So I feel pretty comfortable about that, but I will be honest about the foreign language piece. We're not there yet.
Well, and I know we're slightly over time, so we can do a little bit more of the presentation, but if people need to go, I'm sure there are ways we can get this information to you afterwards as well. So, okay, we'll share a few last kind of bits of information. So this is a taste of the schedule. You can see it's really important to us. Oops, there we go. To start the day together in our group's advisory style before we jump into academics. We give those prime morning hours, the kind of mid to late morning zone, which is a really good time for learning 2 quests, as that's that really deep integrated learning. Then we make sure we include math while we're still in the prime morning hours. A good amount of time for lunch, recess, and PE. Middle schoolers really need to move. All students do. So it's important to us that they have that time. Unquest or math, we can say more about that. And then ending the day with a bit of flex time or kind of a checkout, so that if something has been bubbling up, whether it's a social emotional thing or simply confusion, like I don't get how I'm supposed to do the next step in the project, that they have time to check in with an adult, with a guide, and make sense of that before they're dismissed.
Yeah, I'll jump in just in Conquest time. That's a time that we created that this year. For example, we had a number of kids who needed more time writing, essay writing. And so for something that didn't naturally fit into the quest, we have a kind of an academic period set aside, to work on whatever's needed at the moment. And so that's kind of a clinic time to work on that. And then the flex time also includes their planner time. That's when they get organized for the evening so they know what their homework is. And so there's a specific executive functioning structure put in place to help kids get into good practices about managing their calendar, managing their time.
In middle school, do the kids still interact with the grands?
Yeah, they do. Their actual special is art and IG combined. So they are doing their art classes with the grands upstairs, which has been beautiful.
All right, and then a little bit on the calendar, just this we mentioned before, but instead of having kind of the same steady pace all through the year, we learn in bursts as a way to sustain motivation. And so there are 5 short terms, which you can see laid out here. And then between those, sometimes there's a natural vacation time, but we think it's really useful to have kind of moments of refreshing your mind by focusing on something different. So sometimes, like we just did the design challenge last October, or this last intersession, sometimes it's an arts focused intersession, sometimes it's a camping trip, but that kind of lets us focus deeply on one thing and meanwhile refresh the rest of our brain so we come back ready for a new set of projects. And then we'll just, I think, maybe wrap up here talking about, what are we looking to develop fundamentally? You heard this in the developmental frame of things, that we're looking to develop students who know how to belong, how to achieve, and how to be their authentic selves. Some of the ways that appears that they're confident in their work with adults. Having the challenge each term, so 5 times a year, to present your work to adults, often strangers, really builds this pretty dramatically over the 3 years. We want to see that they can manage complexity. These are not straightforward worksheet type projects, as you're hearing us say again and again. We want them to always have a base of belonging and acceptance. We know they can't reach anything close to their potential without that. That's where advisory comes in. And we want them to feel like architects of their own learning and even of their own lives. I think that's kind of what we're all building toward here, that you come out of middle school with more knowledge of who you are, much more sense of what you can do in the world, confidence that you can do things that actually matter. And that's a pretty fantastic and rare foundation for high school. So we'll leave it here. Maybe if we just have a few more minutes, take any last questions before we have to wrap up.
I just want to say thank you. Got some really good information. I wish I had this in middle school.
Thank
really
you.
do.
Me too. I mean, I think that's why I'm doing this,
I
honestly.
had this in middle school.